The beam from the Japanese destroyer Spotlight scanned the sea like a deadly probe. It passed just inches from our prow, leaving us frozen in suspense, our motors throttled back to a murmur as we floated silently in the gloom near Vela La Vela. 23 U.S. sailors huddled flat on the deck of PT-164, desperate to vanish into the night. Deep in the holds of the 3 enemy transports trailing that warship, almost 8,000 troops remained oblivious that their push to bolster Kolombangara was destined to conclude in the inky depths of the Solomon Sea. It was July 19, 1943, and in precisely 4 minutes, we'd ignite chaos from the obscurity. My fingers clenched the dual 50 caliber gun so hard my joints throbbed. Next to me, Ensign Robert Dutch Vanderberg murmured bearings to our captain, Lieutenant Commander Arthur M. McPhersonson. The faint emerald shimmer from our compass was the sole illumination we risked. Aft of us, concealed in the lunar shade thrown by Vela La Vela's rugged volcanic ridges, PT-168 and PT-171 lingered for our cue. We embodied America's hidden arsenal, and soon the Imperial Japanese Navy would learn why the night had ceased to be their safeguard. I'm Chief Petty Officer Thomas Tom Harrigan, U.S. Navy Reserve, among the pioneers who demonstrated that modest wooden craft could doom mighty metal behemoths. Folks frequently inquire about my role in 1943's tightest-kept naval mystery. Honestly, we were far too occupied dodging death to ponder legacy building. All we grasped was that a flop this evening would let those 8,000 Japanese fighters arrive at Kolombangara, where they'd butcher young Americans battling for that vital airstrip. Each torpedo aboard stood for countless U.S. lives potentially spared. Sinking every foe's vessel translated to families stateside spared the grim notice from the War Department. To grasp how 3 vessels tinier than typical pleasure craft could defy the mighty Imperial Japanese Navy in its prime, consider the odds we faced that summer of 1943. The enemy had mastered nocturnal battles as if it were poetry. Ever since their triumph at Savo Island the prior August, sinking 4 Allied cruisers while emerging unscathed, they dominated the shadows across the Solomons. Their crews drilled relentlessly in darkness warfare, honing skills sans radar, relying solely on sharp vision and flawless teamwork. They dubbed their evening resupply missions the Tokyo Express. We labeled them the Rat Run. Regardless, they shuttled reinforcements and gear with scant interference after dusk. The U.S. fleet boasted grander vessels, superior detection gear, and greater punch. Yet, we were forfeiting the nocturnal campaign. Our commanders, schooled in classic line-of-battle strategies from Jutland and Manila Bay, struggled to pivot to this unconventional fight. Our heavy cruisers and escorts, built for vast sea clashes, proved helpless targets in the Solomon's narrow channels. We required an alternative, a surprise the Japanese couldn't anticipate. That innovation emerged from covert shipyards, stretching from New Orleans to New York, poised to transform sea combat eternally. The PT boat, patrol torpedo boat, sprang from urgency and Yankee resourcefulness. Measuring 80 feet in length and 20 feet across, they were fashioned from layered mahogany plywood rather than iron. Triple Packard 5M11 power plants, tweaked from Liberty plane motors, propelled them beyond 45 knots, outpacing any submersible or standard combatant. We packed 4 21-inch launchers with Mark 13 fish, a 20mm Oerlikon gun, 50 caliber MGs, and munitions sufficient for roughly 15 minutes of fierce engagement. Beyond that, we'd either race back or plunge under. I encountered my initial PT boat in February 1943 at the Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron base in Melville, Rhode Island. As a tin can veteran straight off Atlantic convoy runs, the Navy solicited daring souls for risky assignments on prototype craft. The enlistment officer stayed mum on details, just warning of a projected loss rate exceeding 50%. From 200 hopefuls, they picked 40. I qualified thanks to celestial navigation savvy and handling experience with skiffs from my Chesapeake Bay youth. Boarding PT-164. Initially, I figured the brass had gone daft. This wasn't a fighter, it was an oversized racer harboring big ambitions. The frame was timber. Timber amid clashes of plate and plating. Bunks were so tight that rotating shifts for sleep wasn't optional, it was essential. Armor, Just thin panels near the pilot house, one solid strike from more than small arms fire, and we'd splinter into flotsam. But encountering McPhersonson shifted my view. Mac was 28, a veteran by speedboat norms, bearing eyes worn by excess horrors. He'd endured Pearl Harbor on the destroyer USS Shaw when the Japanese struck. Attached to our boat, he'd battled at Midway and signed up for PT duty because, as he put it, he'd grown weary of serving as sitting ducks. It was time to turn predator. Mac grasped a key truth that the rest of us took weeks to figure out. PT boats weren't designed for head-on clashes like traditional warships. Instead, we operated as sea-based guerrillas, elusive killers who hit from hiding spots and slipped away before foes could respond. Our team was a ragtag mix of oddballs and experts who wouldn't have mixed on any standard Navy ship. Dutch Vanderberg, the exec officer, was a Yale math whiz who crunched torpedo trajectories mentally quicker than most guys could fiddle with a slide rule. Chief motor machinist's mate, Carlos Charlie Mendoza, had tinkered with hot rod motors in L.A. pre-war and could coax our finicky Packards to hum softly like cats or thunder like beasts, whatever the situation called for. Radio man second class. William Sparks Patterson hailed from the subfleet where he'd mastered silent comms. Our torpedo specialist, gunner's mate first class Patrick Paddy O'Brien, handled those mechanical beasts like a pro. Each Mark 13 torpedo tipped the scales at 2,200 pounds and ran as pricey as a stateside home. Paddy fussed over them more than many husbands did their spouses, tweaking, scrubbing, and coaxing them endlessly. These gems, he'd murmur while buffing the bronze blades, are why the Japs respect us. One hit, one sink, or we're merely costly bait. Rounding out our 12-man outfit were a couple extra gunners, an engineer, a cook who moonlighted as a corpsman, and 3 deckhands tackling all the odds and ends. We spanned races and backgrounds, urban slickers and country lads, quitters from school and degree holders, bound by a stark reality. Every one of us had volunteered. Fully aware, survival odds were slim in this fight. The grind at Melville was harsh and relentless. From those initial PT setbacks, the Navy knew raw zeal fell short. To outmatch Japanese threats, we had to be swifter, sharper, and fiercer. We drilled lightning raids till we nailed torpedo drops amid 40-knot wave slams. We honed navigation by ear and gut amid blinding storm downpours. Above all, we shifted mindset from disciplined seamen to ruthless buccaneers. Commander James Wild Jim Patterson, overseeing drills, had endured the Philippine hell and fled Corregidor via one of the final PT escapes. His creed was straightforward. The Japanese anticipate honorable combat. Defy it. They bank on naval protocols. Ignore them. They figure darkness scares you. Flip it and terrify them. He drilled home that our prime assets weren't the fish, but stealth, velocity, and bold nerve. We pulled into our advance outpost at Renova on June 30, 1943, right as New Georgia's assault kicked off. The setup was basic: a fuel stash, screened Quonset shacks, and a crude pier tucked beneath palm fronds. First impression hit via the odor: spoiled jungle, diesel tang, and cloying rot from the tropics. Next came the rumble of cannonade from New Georgia, where Leathernecks bled to seize Mundafield, Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 9. We formed 12 PT craft aimed at blocking Jap supply runs across the Central Solomons. On paper, the job seemed straightforward: scour slots between enemy hubs and torpedo any vessel under the rising sun flag. In truth, it proved a nightmare of snares. The zone twisted with coral traps, lava isles, and concealed Jap outposts. Foes boasted scout planes, island spotters everywhere, and DD packs drilled to chase down PTs. Our debut run on July 5th turned nightmarish. 3 vessels, ours among them, tried ambushing a Jap freighter group off Vela La Vela. An enemy seaplane caught us short of launch range. Abruptly, 4 cans charged, floods glaring and batteries barking. We bolted like hares, zigzagging past geysering blasts. PT-158 caught a 5-inch round square and vaporized. 12 souls erased in a blink, shredded with their craft. We evaded for 4 hours amid reefs and coves before breaking free. 0 fish loosed, 0 hits scored, yet a boat and her boys were forfeit. That evening, crammed at Renova, Mac rallied us. "Today's a vital takeaway," he murmured. We can't brawl like big boys swapping broadsides. Gunfights aren't our game. Hit from the shadows or sit tight. A brutal truth, bought with lives, but it molded all ops ahead. In the ensuing fortnight, we forged fresh ploys via stumbles and tweaks. We mastered lurking in aisle-blind radar zones for stealthy closes. We discovered that idling on a single engine after cutting power to the other two sharply diminished our audible presence. Crucially, we devised methods for synchronizing assaults across several vessels using basic visual cues that the enemy forces were unable to decode. The intel support we received was extraordinary. Aussie spotters concealed in the highlands of territories under Japanese control would transmit updates on hostile naval traffic via radio. Indigenous residents of the Solomons, facing death if discovered, would venture out in their dugouts to deliver details on enemy locations when they encountered us. Occasionally, we'd receive decoded signals from Pearl Harbor outlining precise shipment timetables, though usually we relied on gut feel and hard-won know-how to track our prey. Back in July 1943, the PT craft remained under wraps as classified armaments. Navy dispatches avoided naming us outright, alluding instead to minor vessels or nuisance craft. The Japanese sensed disruptions to their supply lines, but early assessments pegged us as subs or drifting hazards. They dismissed the notion of the U.S. deploying fragile wooden racers against armored behemoths. That misjudgment proved our biggest edge. Intelligence from the Coast Watcher, on the evening of July 18th, signaled a significant enemy resupply fleet navigating Blackett Strait toward Vila on Kolombangara. This marked the prize we'd anticipated. Several freighters with light protection, compelled to traverse confined channels where their numerical superiority offered little benefit. Mac offered our vessel to spearhead the strike, joined by PT-168, commanded by Lieutenant Henry Hank Bramwell, and PT-171, led by Lieutenant Junior Grade Joseph Joey Antonelli. The pre-mission rundown that night crackled with urgency. Reports projected 3 substantial cargo ships guarded by a single or pair of destroyers, ferrying units from the Japanese 13th Regiment, veteran fighters hardened in campaigns across China and the Philippines. No mere engineers or logistics personnel here. These were battle-tested infantry poised to turn the tide against our leathernecks on New Georgia. Our squadron commander, Commander William Bill Specht, laid it out bluntly. "Fellas, that fleet must not make landfall at Vila. Ram them if necessary. Sink them before dawn." As dusk fell on July 19th, staining the Solomons' horizon in crimson hues, we completed our last-minute setups. Patty O'Brien reviewed the torpedo inventory yet again, configuring the Mark 13s for a 10-foot dive and 28-knot velocity, ideal for striking a burdened freighter. Charlie Mendoza fine-tuned our power plants to peak efficiency, fitting silencers to dampen the roar. Dutch Vanderberg mapped and remapped our assault vector, factoring in tides, breezes, and lunar placement. I inspected the 50 calibers once more, verifying smooth loading of the belts. We stocked solely with piercing and flaming projectiles. Standard lead slugs bounced off metal hulls, but these API types could breach control rooms, ignite blazes, and pin down opposing gunners. Tracers dotted every 5th shot, weaving luminous streaks like lethal pyrotechnics across the blackness. At 20-30 hours, we cast off and ventured into the deepening gloom. The trio of boats advanced in single file, motors hushed to a subdued growl. Clearing Rendova Harbor, Mac directed a weapons trial. The void exploded momentarily with bursts from a dozen 50s and 3 20mm guns slamming into the waves. Quiet resumed swiftly, interrupted solely by the steady thrum of propulsion and the splash against our sides. The sea proved choppier than ideal, sporting a 2-foot swell that promised to complicate torpedo runs. Yet it also concealed our trails better and muffled our mechanical hum beneath the surf. Each edge counted when you pitted 80 feet of timber against 400 feet of ironclad might. By 2300 hours, we'd stationed ourselves for the pounce along Vela Lavela's northern shore. Mac throttled back to bare minimum, and we floated silently in the void, alert. Nothing but hull-slapping ripples and faint booms from New Georgia's shore batteries reached our ears. Then, at 2347 hours, Sparks Patterson intercepted a Coast Watcher alert. 3 big vessels, 2 Guardians on 280 heading, 18 knots, 15 miles out. Game time. Mac fired up 2 motors, easing them along as we angled to cut them off. The calculations were straightforward yet vital. The foe steamed at 18 knots on a fixed path. Our max without excessive foam was 35 knots. Spotting right would let us clash precisely as they funneled into Blackett Strait's tightest stretch, denying them evasion space. At 00:18 hours on July the 20th, Dutch glassed the silhouettes amid the stars, right on cue. The Japanese held impeccable order. A pair of destroyers up front, trailed by 3 freighters and a final destroyer astern. No running lights betrayed them, but their bulk and even intervals rendered them unmistakable. It was straightforward to follow once you spotted the right signs. Mac's strategy was brilliantly straightforward, yet perilously risky. PT-168 would strike from the left flank, PT-171 from the right, while we charged directly into the center behind the front transport. This required slipping right between the guarding destroyers, navigating a deadly gauntlet with peril on both sides, but success would sow utter chaos and give us unobstructed hits on every one of the 3 transports. "Proceed at minimal speed," Mac murmured. We inched ahead at just 5 knots, scarcely advancing, allowing the convoy to draw nearer to us. At 2,000 yards out, the rumble of their motors reached us, the profound hum of enormous diesel engines propelling vast loads across the sea. By 1,500 yards, finer features emerged. The tiered bridge of the lead destroyer in pagoda fashion, the loading cranes on the transports, and even crew members shifting about on the decks. At 1,000 yards, Mac signaled the move. 3 quick bursts over the radio, and all 3 PT boats lunged ahead at once. Our power plants thundered from idle to maximum in moments, raising our prow clear of the waves as we hit assault velocity. The darkness erupted as we hurtled toward the foe's group at 40 knots, tiny vessels defying colossal metal behemoths. The Japanese were utterly unprepared. Their sentries, drilled to detect subs or incoming destroyers, hadn't anticipated assailants closing in this swiftly from such proximity. We pierced their lineup before they could respond, darting amid the escort vessels at mere feet away. I unleashed my paired 50 calibers, sweeping the closest destroyer's command area, watching my tracer rounds shatter glass and bounce off armor, torpedo away, first and second. Patty released our initial pair of Mark 13s from 600 yards, a ridiculously tight distance where failure seemed inconceivable. The sleek projectiles burst from their launchers into the sea, their rotors whirring at peak right away. Dual trails of glowing foam stretched out, a repurposed liner packed with more than 3,000 Japanese troops. The destroyer off our starboard side at last stirred, sweeping its spotlight our way. The piercing beam locked on immediately, its glare overwhelming. Right then, their 25mm flak guns barked to life, emerald streaks clawing toward us like lethal claws. Explosions erupted nearby, drenching the crew in seawater from the near misses. Then, the torpedoes connected. One slammed the transport aft of the bridge in a deafening blast that illuminated the blackness like a bolt from above. The next rammed amidships, snapping the hull in 2 without delay. The 8,000-ton behemoth heaved upward briefly before fracturing apart, each piece plunging straight down. Amid the harsh light and muzzle flashes, we glimpsed scores of Japanese troops tumbling into the waves, their cries piercing the din despite our roaring motors. PT-168 followed suit. Its duo of Mark 13s pounded the second transport. That one, brimming with munitions and supplies for the VA outpost, detonated like an erupting mountain. The force hurled me to the deck, and a scorching gust swept across our craft. Burning wreckage showered us, igniting minor blazes on the timber planking that we desperately trampled flat. The enemy destroyers were rallying by now, though confronted with a nightmare dilemma. We were too near for their big guns to angle downward effectively, and tangled among their own cargo ships, any shots risked friendly hits. Their counter was to charge us outright, leveraging their bulk to crush us underfoot. The closest one veered sharply in our direction, its razor prow zeroed on our side. Given our mutual velocity, collision loomed in perhaps 10 seconds. Mac cranked the helm sharply to starboard and jammed the throttles beyond limits. The engines howled in strain, but we spun gracefully, evading the bow by under 10 feet. In the close shave, I unloaded an entire ammo drum into their control station from spitting distance, sparks erupting as rounds found their targets. PT-171 fared worse. Joey Antonelli had queued up ideal launches against the third transport, but a Japanese destroyer pinned them with illumination just before launch. The adversary's 25mm fire scored direct, riddling PT-171's front with punctures. A round clipped a torpedo. Thankfully, it failed to blow. The explosive required water immersion and spin-up to arm. Even so, Joey broke off the assault and retreated, belching fumes and shipping waves. We looped back for a second strike, but the shock factor had vanished. Spotlights from the entire Japanese fleet now raked the surface, while weaponry of all sizes blazed indiscriminately. The sea churned violently from countless impacts, resembling a downpour. To make matters graver, they'd brought their 5-inch batteries to bear, capable of shredding us with one strike. "Fire off the rest of the torpedoes and let's pull back," Mac bellowed amid the roar. Patty unleashed our final pair of Mark 13s toward the last transport. However, the captain spotted the incoming threats and skillfully maneuvered through the wakes, aligning the vessel parallel to their path, allowing both torpedoes to glide by without harm on either flank. Soon after, we were speeding away, pushing all 3 engines to their limits while dodging bursts of shell fire amid the gloom. In our wake, the clash kept intensifying. Even after absorbing multiple strikes, PT-168 fired off another torpedo that struck the doomed second freighter. The ammo carrier's final convulsions lit up the whole channel, with secondary blasts tearing through her frame as she sank. 2 out of the 3 freighters were destroyed, claiming almost 6,000 Japanese troops in the process. The remaining freighter and escorts emerged unscathed, yet deeply rattled. We rendezvoused about 5 miles south of the fight zone. Each of the 3 craft was battered but seaworthy. PT-171 fared the poorest, riddled with gashes below the waterline and 1 motor disabled. We pulled up beside her to assist in shifting injured sailors over, while our deckhands desperately sealed breaches using anything handy, from bedding to flotation gear. PT-168 had her antenna sheared off and suffered fragmentation wounds across her upper works, yet she stayed battle-ready. Our own vessel had gotten off lightly, with just a few metal punctures, a ruined cannon tube from excessive heat, and charring from close calls. Still, we had survived and fulfilled our objective. 2 freighters confirmed down, thousands of foe troops eliminated, and the enemy's build-up timeline thrown into chaos. Instead of pressing on toward Wewak, the lone surviving freighter turned tail and retreated to Rabaul. The trip home was fraught with anxiety. At dawn, Japanese seaplanes took to the skies, hunting us down. We concealed ourselves amid the cover of tiny isles, draped in fronds for camouflage, motors silent, holding our breath as hostile planes buzzed above. It stretched what ought to have been a 3-hour run into a grueling 14 hours, but every one of us reached Rendova intact. The after-action review was thorough. Intel specialists grilled us on every aspect: enemy maneuvers, armament performance, reaction speeds. Our accounts would circulate to all PT units across the Pacific Theater. Insights from that skirmish would protect U.S. personnel and doom more adversary ships for the war's duration. Yet the short-term fallout proved even more profound. Intercepted signals captured Japanese chatter about mysterious U.S. wonder weapons and swift torpedo craft materializing out of thin air. For the first time, the Imperial fleet dreaded the night. They couldn't navigate unchecked after dark anymore, nor assure protection for even their best-defended groups. Any silhouette could conceal a PT boat. Any noise might signal incoming American power plants. In the ensuing weeks, the Japanese overhauled their logistics approach entirely. Their shipments swelled in size but dwindled in number. Escort destroyers doubled, then tripled. They deployed seaplanes with spotlights for nocturnal scouting. These shifts resulted in reduced provisions and troops arriving at outposts, handing our infantry vital edges. The mental toll might have outweighed the battlefield wins. Japanese forces, anticipating aid that never materialized, started to despair. Foe leaders, failing to secure shipments, scrapped planned assaults. The legend of Japanese dominance under cover of night, shattered by splintery hulls manned by young American volunteers and backups, started to erode across the Pacific. Our group's triumph spurred a swift buildup of the PT fleet. Fresh outposts sprang up in the Solomons and New Guinea, upgraded vessels featuring superior powertrains, detection gear, and reinforced shielding entered mass production. Methods honed by our hard-won experience turned into standard protocols, instructed at prep sites from Rhode Island to California. The price tag on that victory tallied in comrades who never returned. 2 weeks post-raid, PT-160 struck a mine on the way back from scouting. The entire crew perished. PT-162 fell prey to Japanese escorts in broad daylight after a breakdown stranded her motionless. They pummeled her to scrap. Just 3 men were fished from the sea. Joey Antonelli, commander of PT-171, fell to a marksman during a refuel stop at an advance outpost. Come October 1943, as I shipped stateside for fresh build instruction, our unit had forfeited 7 boats and 73 lives. But we'd sent over 40 Japanese craft, from destroyers to lighters, to the bottom or crippled them, and slain thousands of troops who never made landfall. The trade-off was harsh, yet essential. Our PT losses could be rebuilt, their warships and seasoned operators could not. I shipped back to the Pacific in March 1944 as second-in-command of PT-321, patrolling the Philippines. The craft had improved, radar sets, plating safeguarding the bridge, steadier fish. Yet the core stayed unchanged: velocity, stealth, and boldness. We remained. This demonstrated how U.S. ingenuity could neutralize even the toughest opponent edges. The Japanese struggled to counter the danger posed by PT boats. They experimented with all sorts of countermeasures: dedicated pursuit units, destroyers fitted with radar, and even kamikaze craft meant to crash into us. Yet they couldn't cover every spot, safeguard all supply lines, or restore security to the darkness once more. The hidden advantage they'd uncovered far too late had forever shifted the power dynamics across the Pacific. M. McPhersonson made it through the conflict, receiving a Navy Cross along with 2 Silver Stars. He remained in the Navy, later leading a destroyer group during the Korean War. Our correspondence continued right up to his passing in 1987. During his memorial service, his son shared that Mac frequently remarked how PT boats taught him the true essence of bravery, not the lack of dread, but pressing forward amid sheer fright. Dutch Vanderberg headed back to Yale post-war, yet he always carried the navigation insights gained amid the Solomons. He rose to become a top U.S. oceanographer, leveraging the expertise from evading Japanese destroyers to chart seaflows and submerged ridges. He once confided in me that navigating through foe vessels at 40 knots under cover of night made all subsequent challenges feel straightforward. Charlie Mendoza resumed crafting high-performance motors in Los Angeles, adapting the maintenance hacks from keeping PT engines humming to boost vehicle velocities. His workshop gained mythic status in the hot rod scene, marked by a plaque declaring it a speed shop. We got those PT boats soaring, he'd boast to clients. If he could drive 4,500 horsepower to propel 50 tons at 45 knots, he could accelerate just about anything. Patty O'Brien continued his Navy career, emerging as a key authority on torpedoes within the branch. He authored the guide for Mark 13 torpedo upkeep that stayed in use through the 1970s. Still, he held dear the memory of the projectiles we launched that evening near Vella La Vella. "Those were my projectiles that doomed those troop carriers," he'd declare proudly. 2 launches, 2 strikes, 6,000 Japanese troops who never reached positions to harm Americans. The tale of PT boats tends to get eclipsed by the grander clashes of World War II, Midway, Guadalcanal, Leyte Gulf. But for crew members like us on those modest timber fighters, we understood we'd contributed to a game-changing force. We'd established that ingenuity paired with valor could triumph over established norms and sheer scale. We'd illustrated how American seamen, plenty of whom were ocean novices prior to Pearl Harbor, could best the globe's premier fleet on its home turf. Our edge didn't truly stem from the vessels alone, impressive feats of design as they were, nor from the torpedoes, potent as they proved when reliable. The genuine key lay in the American drive for novelty, the readiness to experiment radically when standard tactics fell short. Though top brass at first belittled PT boats as playthings, lower-ranking officers and ranks demonstrated that armed gadgets could alter a conflict's trajectory. Whenever I encounter accounts of contemporary sea battles, missile craft, covert tech, irregular tactics, I recognize echoes of those PT boats. We established that maritime fights needn't revolve around capital ships exchanging fire at 20,000 yards. They could hinge on velocity and invisibility, on ambushing from unforeseen angles and slipping away prior to retaliation. Each swift assault vessel in the modern Navy inherits traits from those lightweight racers that haunted the Japanese fleet. The term the Japanese coined for their naval lexicon in 1943 boiled down to mosquito boat dread, a panic that rippled across their armada. After-action talks with Japanese commanders showed PT boats sowed chaos disproportionate to their count. They were forced to reckon with our omnipresence, to brace for strikes that could prove illusory, to squander assets guarding against phantoms. Admiral Tanaka Raizo, overseer of numerous Tokyo Express operations, reflected post-war, "The U.S. PT boats haunted us like nothing else. Subs we could pursue with depth bombs, planes we could spot approaching. But those infernal speedsters materialized from the void, lashed out like serpents and melted back into obscurity. They turned our domain, the night we'd once commanded, into a source of terror. That dread, that unpredictability we instilled, outweighed any tally of vessels we'd downed. It marked the pivot where the Imperial Japanese Navy, unchallenged in the Pacific since Pearl Harbor, started questioning its dominance. When lifelong night fighters began dreading illusions, the mental victory was secured. The PT boat's development throughout the war was astonishing. Initial models like ours were basically pre-war prototypes thrust into battle. By 1945, they boasted radar, rockets, upgraded torpedoes, and early homing weapons. Yet the fundamental idea endured. Compact, swift, lethal, and rough-hewn, crewed by daring souls ready to gamble everything for their nation. A tale that embodies the PT boat ethos unfolded in October 1944 amid the Battle of Leyte Gulf. A group of PT boats, utterly outnumbered and outmatched, the tiny PT boats launched a daring assault on the Japanese battleship Yamato, the biggest war vessel ever constructed. Their torpedoes failed to breach even Yamato's thick armor plating, yet the crews pressed on, compelling the colossal ship to dodge and weave, which gave the U.S. escort carriers precious moments to slip away. Those little craft didn't bring down the behemoth that day, but their bravery preserved American lives. The PT boat outposts turned into stuff of legend themselves: Renova, Tulagi, Mios, Wendy, strange-sounding spots that stood for bugs, fevers, and late-night raids. These weren't like Pearl Harbor or San Diego, with their fancy clubs and comfy bunks. No, they were swampy nightmares where we survived on canned meat and smokes, where letters from home dragged on for months, and the only diversions were card games and tall tales. Still, spirits stayed strong since we understood our efforts mattered. The people of the Solomon Islands merit our deepest thanks. They staked their lives to aid us, steering us past hidden reefs, pulling shot-down pilots and stranded crewmen from the water and sharing tips on enemy patrols. Plenty faced death when the Japanese discovered their support for us. Their bravery and selflessness proved vital to our victories. Lacking their guidance, we'd have stumbled blindly through those tangled aisles. Then, there were the coast watchers, those solitary sentinels tucked away on enemy-held land with their wireless sets and scopes. They acted as our unseen protectors. They'd signal alerts like 40 bombers inbound, or destroyer group steaming south fast. Countless times their heads-up spared our stations from sudden strikes or let us set up ideal traps. We rarely crossed paths with them, but our survival was in their debt. One game-changer for PT boat missions came with radar technology. Early versions were so basic, they struggled to tell land from a vessel. Yet come late 1944, we tracked foes through pitch-black nights and thick mist. The Japanese, long masters of nighttime sight and drills, now faced the tables turning against them. We'd spot them first in the dark, the edge we needed for nocturnal battles. Our strategies kept evolving non-stop. We picked up on dropping aluminum chaff to jam enemy radar. We honed wolfpack methods, sinking strikes from several boats approaching from various angles. We mastered employing coastal guns as decoys, luring foes to expose themselves by blasting at dummies while we circled for the genuine hit. The riskiest ops were the quiet ones no one talked about. sneaking coast watchers into hostile territory, extracting pinned-down Marines from cut-off shores, delivering ammo to cut off strongholds amid gunfire. These lacked the thrill of torpedo runs, but they were grueling, perilous tasks that rescued innumerable souls. We turned into the Navy's all-purpose tool, called in for gigs too risky or wild for standard ships. Bonds among PT boat crews stood out in the armed forces. A destroyer might pack 300 sailors and you'd barely learn half their names. But with just 12 guys on a PT, you knew it all. The loud sleepers, the ones haunted by bad dreams, the queasy types, the reliables in a crisis. That closeness built ties enduring forever. Decades post-war, our reunions felt like kin get-togethers because we were family, hammered together in the fight. Meals aboard PT boats call for their own rant, really. We subsisted on K-rations, spam, dehydrated eggs, and trades from bigger vessels. Fresh water stayed scarce, saved strictly for sipping. We rinsed off in salt water, which crusted us with salt that irritated and stung. Coffee, bitter, potent stuff that could strip paint, kept us going. Some squads got inventive, blasting fish with grenades or bartering torpedo booze for decent grub from shore staff. Upkeep never stopped and stayed make or break. Seawater aided every bit of gear. Jungle swelter decayed timber and canvas while full throttle runs pushed parts to the brink. We devoted more hours to fixes than to combat. Each sailor turned into a fixer-upper, woodworker, and wire whiz out of pure need. A PT dead in the water near foes spelled doom, so we revered maintenance like a sacred duty. The Solomon's climate fought us relentlessly. Sudden downpours could whip up from clear skies, churning flat ocean into towering swells. Bolts from storms might zap our comms and wiring. The stifling dampness drained us so bad that fellows would black out on watch. But rough skies helped too, cloaking us from spotter planes and blending our speedsters into the choppy seas. Plotting courses there demanded savvy beyond any Annapolis class. Maps were junk, drawn from 1800s pokes. Reefs popped up fresh after gales. We got wise to spotting depth by hue and ripple, to catching the whiff of shore ahead of sight, to steering by gut when tech crapped out. Each safe run etched more into our heads of those lethal seas. Japanese countermeasures against PT boats shifted over the course of the conflict. They built specialized destroyers with shallow drafts tailored to track us down. They devised joint scouting tactics involving seaplanes and destroyers working in tandem. At one point, they even deployed seized PT boats as lures. Yet for each tactic they devised, we came up with ways to outmaneuver it. It turned into a lethal cat-and-mouse chase waged at 40 knots under cover of night. Seldom mentioned is the mental strain it imposed. Existing in perpetual alertness, aware that every outing might be fatal, witnessing comrades perish in gruesome fashion, it left an indelible scar on everyone. A few sailors broke down, seeking reassignments despite the stigma of cowardice. Some grew hooked on the rush, signing up for riskier assignments. The rest of us simply persevered, devising methods to handle the persistent dread. The gallows humor that emerged was morbid yet essential. Our vessels bore names like Sudden Death, Hell's Angels, and Grim Reaper. We'd sketch animated figures on our torpedoes. Donald Duck zooming along on one was a favorite. We'd invent ditties about dooming Japanese vessels. The bloodier the lyrics, the more they stuck. It served as mental shielding, transforming the intolerable into something survivable. PT boats' influence reached far beyond the Pacific theater. For the Normandy landings, they were tasked with shielding the armada from German E-boats. Insights gained in the Solomons informed operations in the Mediterranean, the English Channel, and Europe's inland waterways. U.S. PT boat strategies shaped global naval strategies, sparking comparable initiatives in numerous fleets around the world. Reflecting on it all these years later, I'm astonished we made it through. We were largely young recruits tinkering with lethal playthings amid a conflict that claimed millions of lives. We committed errors that ought to have been our end. We gambled in ways that still send chills down my spine. But we also achieved the extraordinary. We transformed a raw idea into a decisive instrument of victory. We demonstrated that U.S. creativity and bravery could surmount any hurdle. The heritage of PT boats endures in the modern Navy. Today's swift assault vessels, elite ops craft, and hit-and-run ships all inherit the essence of those pioneering Mosquito fleet boats. Their crews may be unaware of the midnight runs near Vela La Vela or the havoc we unleashed on Japanese supply lines, yet they uphold the ethos of velocity, stealth, and boldness. When folks inquire if I take pride in my duty, I recount that evening of July 20th, 1943. 3 modest timber hulls struck a vital foe convoy, plunging thousands of Japanese troops into the depths. We surged from the shadows, living up to our moniker, and vanished before retaliation could mount. We embodied America's hidden edge, altering the Pacific Campaign's trajectory. The Japanese reeled not only from our craft, but from their symbolism. The U.S. drive to pioneer, to hazard everything, to defy established norms. They'd scrutinized our fleet for years, familiar with our battleships and carriers, our customs and maneuvers. But they couldn't conceive of us unleashing wooden racers packed with torpedoes against their armored behemoths. That oversight exacted a heavy price. Ultimately, the PT boat saga embodies a quintessentially American tale. We adapted a British design, fueled it with aviation-grade Packard engines, equipped it with destroyer-caliber torpedoes, and staffed it with landlubbers fresh to the sea since Pearl Harbor. By all logic, it defied success, yet it thrived thanks to raw grit and cleverness. The final active PT boat left service in 1959, supplanted by sleeker, swifter, superior designs. But to those of us who manned them during World War II, they remain the craft that clinched Pacific triumph. We showed that brawn isn't the key to conquest, that valor outweighs plating, and that U.S. mariners in fragile wood could prevail against all odds in any theater, at any moment. As I wrap up this recollection in my home office, encircled by time-worn photos and brittle newsprint, the thunder of those Packard motors still echoes in my ears through the darkness. I can still sense the sting of Solomon's spray against my skin, the acrid tang of gunpowder and fuel oil. Above all, I still carry the swell of honor from contributing to a game-changer in sea combat. We were youths forged into warriors aboard those splintery hulls, battling an aggression we never ignited but resolved to end. We struck from the gloom because it played to our strengths, where our agility and unpredictability tipped the scales. The Japanese came to dread the night they once dominated. They discovered that Yankee resourcefulness could flip every weakness into a weapon. That's the enduring mark of PT boats, not merely the hulls we dispatched or the clashes we dominated, but the evidence that liberty's defenders can topple any oppression. We were tiny, swift, and lethal. We remained hidden assets, concealed precisely until they could shift the course of the war. We formed the nimble squadron that dismantled a mighty power, strike by strike with our torpedoes. The Imperial Japanese Navy was caught off guard by the covert American PT boats, as they embodied all the unforeseen qualities from the U.S. side: bold ingenuity, daring strategies, and the guts to gamble it all on an experimental idea. Once they grasped the danger we presented, the moment had already passed. The darkness they once dominated became our domain. And from that obscurity, we launched relentless attacks until the dawn of Japan's Pacific dominion faded into dusk.